Moving on to news now, an emotional court appearance for a family who once thought that they could trust their granddaughter's husband. Yuri Jenkins is accused of killing Makeva Jenkins in June. Both lived at their home in suburban Lake Worth.
WPTV News Channel 5's Andrew Ruiz is live at the Palm Beach County Jail, and he spoke to everyone involved. It must have been a very emotional conversation, Andrew.
Sure thing, Roxanne and John. Good morning. Both families are distraught. One who says that they feel betrayed by their son-in-law and now have no daughter moving forward. The other because they feel like their son is wrongfully accused. Take a look at video from first appearance where Yuri Jenkins was denied bond by a judge. The courtroom was filled with his in-laws who thought justice had been served when 19-year-old Jovan Joseph was arrested in September. Last night we found out about the new charges and Jenkins' arrest. Makeva's grandmother told us she always had some suspicion that he was involved and says deputies confirmed that for her last night.
I don't have no feelings toward this. I don't even know what to think about it. Either way, Makeva's children gonna be out of mom and a dad. I'm just glad justice is coming to an end.
He went in and cooperated and answered whatever questions he could. He never, like I said, left the area. He continued to cooperate with law enforcement whenever they wanted to, and even when they were accusatory, he continued to cooperate with them, and we've stayed in contact with law enforcement. So what's changed, I can't say.
Now, Jenkins maintains that he is innocent. We can tell you that the sheriff's office took this case to a grand jury, and the grand jury said that there was enough probable cause to go ahead and charge him, and that's when the arrest came through. As far as the details of what was in that probable cause, we will not know that quite yet because of the way that the court system works. So we will be trying to see if we can get future answers in the future. We do know that the masked man, though, that entered the house on that night in June was actually Joseph. So again, much more to come in this developing story. We're live at the Palm Beach County Jail. I'm Andrew Ruiz for WPTV News Channel 5.
How well do you really know the person sleeping beside you? You share the same bed, the same dreams, the same secrets, but what if one of those secrets could end your life? This is not just a story about death. It's about loyalty twisted into a weapon. About a heart that believed in forever and a hand that decided forever had an end date. Tonight, we're stepping into a world where romance and danger share the same pillow. And by the time you finish this story, you'll be asking yourself the same question. How well do you really know the person sleeping beside you? They called her Makeva Jenkins, a name that once echoed success, resilience, and ambition. Born and raised in the vibrant heart of Florida, Makeva was a woman who refused to let circumstances define her. She knew what it meant to struggle. There was a time when her family didn't have much, when bills were stacked higher than hope, and the thought of financial freedom felt like a dream meant for someone else. But Makeva? She wasn't like everyone else. She had this fire in her, a relentless hunger for more. Friends would describe her as warm yet driven, a woman who never shied away from challenges. Her laugh could light up a room, but so could her determination. She wasn't content with just enough. No. Makeva wanted to create a legacy, for herself, for her children, for generations to come. And she did what many only talked about. She turned her life around. Through sheer grit and sleepless nights, Makeva built a thriving business. From the outside looking in, it seemed like a fairy tale. The single mother who hustled her way to success, posting motivational quotes, sharing her journey online, and encouraging others to believe in themselves. On social media, she appeared untouchable, smiling in luxury cars, dining at upscale restaurants, flashing expensive handbags. To her thousands of followers, she was living proof that dreams could come true. But what they didn't know was that success attracts more than admiration. It breeds envy, jealousy, and sometimes, those closest to you are the ones sharpening the knife. Her rise to wealth wasn't quiet. She wanted people to see what hard work could achieve. She wanted to inspire. But inspiration on the internet is a double-edged sword. With every post, every photo, every status update flaunting the finer things in life, Makeva unknowingly painted a target on her back. Someone was watching. Someone who didn't see a motivator, they saw an opportunity. That night, the air inside Makeva's home felt heavier than usual. It was late June. Florida heat pressed against the walls, and the only sound was the low hum of the air conditioner. Makeva was tired, but satisfied. Life was finally aligning. Her kids were asleep. Her plans were bigger than ever. The empire she envisioned was just within reach. But then, a phone call, a knock on the door, a shadow lurking in the background. They say betrayal doesn't come from enemies. It comes from friends, from family, from the people who once sat at your table. Makeva believed she was surrounded by love. She believed she was safe. But as the night unfolded, that belief would cost her everything. And here's the question that will haunt you. How does a woman who beat the odds, who inspired thousands, end up fighting for her life inside the very home she worked so hard to build? This isn't just a story about murder. It's a story about trust, about greed, about how one decision, one conversation, one whisper in the dark can turn celebration into tragedy. By the end of this case, you'll question everyone around you. Because if this could happen to Makeva Jenkins, it could happen to anyone. Under the Florida sun, Makeva Jenkins had carved out a life that many only dreamed of. A mother of 3, a relentless entrepreneur, and the very picture of success, she wasn't shy about her journey from struggle to triumph. She posted it proudly on social media, her late-night brainstorming sessions, her networking events, her affirmations about manifesting wealth and prosperity. To her followers, she was an inspiration. But with every motivational post, every photo flaunting a luxury handbag or a gleaming new car, she was unknowingly feeding a dangerous narrative. Because not everyone watching was clapping. Some were taking notes. Some were counting her blessings, and plotting how to take them away. It was late June 2017 when Makeva's name began circulating in whispers, among people who smiled in her face but secretly envied her rise. She had money, a loving husband, and a growing brand that promised generational wealth. What they didn't see was the pressure, the late bills, the silent fear that it could all collapse. But even if she had flaws, one thing was certain: Makeva believed in herself, and she believed in everyone she loved. That trust would cost her everything. The night of June 29 started like any other summer evening in the Jenkins home. The house smelled of dinner, the kids' laughter echoed down the hall, and Makeva and her husband, Yuri, sat talking about business, life, and their future. But what they didn't know was that outside their comfortable home, someone was waiting. Someone who had no intention of leaving without blood on their hands. By midnight, the house had gone quiet. The kids were asleep, and the couple retreated to their bedroom. But the peace was fragile, because just beyond the locked doors, a predator was moving closer. The killer wasn't a masked stranger breaking in through a window. It was someone familiar. Someone who knew the layout of the home, who understood their routine, who had been welcomed in before. A betrayal so intimate, so calculated, it would shake the entire community. What came next would transform a picture-perfect life into a chilling true crime case that no one could have predicted. And it all began with one pull of a trigger, inside her own bedroom. But the question is, how did it get to this point? How does a woman celebrated for giving back, for lifting others, end up hunted by the very people she trusted? Who orchestrated this? Who stood to gain the most from Makeva's death? As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a tangled web of lies, greed, and jealousy, threads that started years before that fatal night. And the deeper they pulled, the more shocking the truth became. This wasn't just a home invasion. This was an execution masked as a robbery. And the person behind it? You won't believe how close they were. This is the story of Makeva Jenkins. The night was silent, too silent for someone who had been basking in newfound success just hours ago. Makeva Jenkins had built an empire from grit and sheer determination, and now, in the early hours of June 29, 2017, her home should have been her sanctuary. But in reality, it had become a ticking time bomb. Inside the modest yet warm home in Lake Worth, Florida, the soft hum of the ceiling fan barely masked the tension hanging in the air. Makeva had spent the previous evening celebrating life, posting triumphantly on social media about how far she had come. "I'm in awe of how far I've come. I went from making $13,000 a year to 6 figures." It was a victory lap, one she had earned after years of relentless struggle. But in the shadows, someone had read that post differently, not as inspiration, but as an opportunity. Tonight, that opportunity had a gun. Makeva was in her bedroom, the faint glow of her phone illuminating her face. Her husband, Yuri Jenkins, was nearby, restless. The financial arguments, the whispered rumors, the secrets that had started to rot the foundation of their marriage, they all clung to the walls like smoke. And somewhere beyond those walls, a plan had already been set in motion. The front door creaked. A sound so small, it could have been mistaken for the house settling, except this wasn't the house. It was a man stepping inside, armed and steady, his presence slicing through the stillness of the night. Yuri froze. His heart thudded against his ribs, his breath hitching as a figure emerged from the hallway, a mask, a gun, and eyes that burned with intent. The intruder didn't hesitate. Words were barked, sharp and cold. "Where's the money? Where is it?" Makeva's voice trembled as she pleaded, explaining they had children, explaining they didn't keep large sums of cash in the house. But the barrel of the gun didn't care. It moved like a predator's eye, settling on her, then on him, then back to her. Time slowed. The sound of their youngest child shifting in sleep echoed louder than gunfire in their heads. And then, one deafening crack split the air. Makeva Jenkins collapsed. The shooter fled. The echo of the gunshot lingered, mingling with Yuri's screams and the frantic scramble for a phone. He dialed 911, his voice splintering into shards of panic. "My wife's been shot. Please, hurry, she's bleeding." Sirens wailed in the distance, but they were too slow, too late. By the time paramedics rushed in, Makeva's body was limp, her vibrant life extinguished in seconds. The woman who had once preached perseverance to thousands of social media followers now lay cold on her bedroom floor, her dreams cut short by a single bullet. But this wasn't just a robbery gone wrong. No, the truth would reveal something far darker, something no one saw coming. Because when investigators started peeling back the layers of Makeva Jenkins' life, they would discover betrayal, greed, and a murder-for-hire plot so chilling it would leave even seasoned detectives questioning the limits of human deceit. And at the center of it all was her husband. The detectives knew time was their enemy. Every minute that passed gave the shooter more room to breathe, more opportunity to weave a narrative that could absolve him of guilt. They didn't just need a lead, they needed something undeniable, something that would tear through the carefully constructed lies. The next morning, the crime lab called. There it was, gunshot residue on Yuri's hands. It wasn't conclusive proof of murder, but it was a dagger pointed at his alibi. Gunshot residue could mean he fired the weapon or simply handled it after the fact, but the timing was damning. Still, the detectives couldn't move in yet. They needed motive. That's when Makeva's phone records started speaking louder than any witness. Dozens of missed calls. Text messages timestamped just minutes before the fatal shot. And there, buried in the chaos, a string of messages from Yuri. The tone was cold, sharp, and dripping with resentment. He wasn't the grieving husband the world thought he was. One text read, "You think you can play me? Watch how quick this goes left." Another, "Don't ever cross me, Makeva. You won't like what happens next." Detective Rowe leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen as the weight of those words settled in the room. This wasn't just a jealous argument. This was a storm that had been building, an explosion waiting for its spark. And that spark? Money. The detectives dug deeper into Makeva's recent financial records. The life insurance policy jumped out immediately, a jaw-dropping $500,000, signed just weeks before her death. The beneficiary? Yuri Jenkins. It painted a picture too vivid to ignore, a husband drowning in financial troubles, watching his wife build an empire, and now, with one signature, seeing her death as a payday. But motive alone wouldn't stick in court. They needed the weapon. They needed the smoking gun. For days, the search turned up nothing. Detectives scoured the crime scene, dumpsters, drainage systems, anywhere a weapon could vanish. Then a break came from the most unlikely source. A neighbor, scrolling through his security camera footage, noticed something strange. Yuri's car leaving the neighborhood at an odd hour the night before the murder, then returning before sunrise. Where had he gone? And why? The footage showed something else, too, a brief glimpse of Yuri stepping out of the car, adjusting his waistband like someone concealing or retrieving a weapon. Armed with this, detectives confronted Yuri again. They played the footage without a word. He watched, his jaw tight, his eyes giving away nothing, or at least trying not to. Finally, Detective Rowe leaned forward and said the words that cracked the silence like thunder. "You want to tell me why your wife is dead and you're the last person seen with her alive?" Yuri's response was calm, too calm. "You're reaching. I loved my wife. But love doesn't leave residue on your hands. Love doesn't write threats at midnight. And love doesn't disappear down dark roads hours before a murder." Detectives weren't done. They pulled cell tower records, tracking Yuri's movements the night before the murder. The data told a chilling story. He had driven to a rural area, far from streetlights, far from cameras, and stayed there for 30 minutes. What was out there? A search team was dispatched. Hours passed, combing through thick brush and muddy trails. Then, half buried in a shallow ditch, wrapped in a dirty cloth, they found it, the gun. Ballistics would later confirm it was the murder weapon. And with that, the walls closed in on Yuri Jenkins. When detectives picked him up for questioning, he walked in calm, almost cocky, like a man who believed he was untouchable. But the moment the evidence was laid out, the phone records, the financial transactions, the messages, his composure shattered. Hours turned into an excruciating interrogation, and then, the dam broke. The confession didn't come easy, but when it did, it was chilling. This wasn't just a random killing. This was orchestrated, planned, paid for. The hit was a business deal, and the currency wasn't cash alone. He told them everything: who paid him, how much, why. And that why was darker than anyone imagined. Yuri Jenkins, the husband, the man who stood before cameras crying for justice, the man who posted tributes about losing his soulmate, the man who the world saw as a grieving widower, was the mastermind behind his wife's death. The reason? Money, control, power. But it wasn't just about life insurance or assets. There was something deeper, a storm brewing inside Yuri that had been masked by luxury cars, motivational speeches, and Instagram-perfect smiles. As investigators pieced together the fragments of Makeva Jenkins' final night, the motive began to take shape, not as an impulsive act of random violence, but as a chillingly calculated betrayal fueled by greed and resentment. In the days following her murder, detectives started to examine the people closest to her. Friends had described her as ambitious and outspoken, a woman who broadcasted her triumphs with confidence and pride. That success, which should have been a symbol of hope, had instead become the seat of envy in her own household. For months, tensions had simmered beneath the surface of her marriage. Makeva's financial triumphs didn't just elevate her lifestyle, they fundamentally shifted the power dynamic in her relationship. She was the breadwinner, the provider, the visionary who pulled the family from scarcity to abundance. Her husband, once the protector, the decision-maker, now stood in the shadow of her accomplishments. To the outside world, they appeared to be a thriving couple living a dream life. But behind closed doors, arguments festered over money, loyalty, and control. What investigators unearthed would turn this image of love into a grotesque facade. Bank records showing sudden cash withdrawals, text messages hinting at infidelity, and whispers from acquaintances who claimed he'd spoken of wanting his own life back. The night of June 29, 2017, was no crime of opportunity. It was, as prosecutors would later argue, a staged tragedy engineered to look like a robbery gone wrong. The suspect, later identified as Dominic, an associate who had known Makeva's husband, didn't randomly pick her house. He had inside knowledge, someone feeding him details about the home layout, her schedule, and, most importantly, the illusion that her recent posts about success meant piles of cash were within reach. This wasn't just a killing, it was an execution born from intimate betrayal. The husband's role in this became the prosecution's centerpiece, a betrayal so deep it ripped apart not just a marriage, but an entire family lineage. When the case moved into the trial phase, the courtroom became an emotional battlefield. The Jenkins family sat in rigid silence as the defense painted Dominic as a lone wolf, a desperate man chasing an easy payday. But the prosecution dismantled that narrative piece by piece, using data, timelines, and the haunting cadence of Makeva's last digital footprints, her celebratory posts, her words about manifesting abundance, her faith in those closest to her. It was these posts, the state argued, that ignited the plan. She believed she was inspiring others. Instead, she inspired her own downfall in the most gruesome way imaginable. Witness after witness took the stand, and with each testimony, the puzzle snapped tighter into focus. A key moment came when a former friend testified that the husband had confided fears of being left behind and had expressed bitterness over how her success overshadowed him. That friend's voice trembled as she recalled a chilling phrase: "If anything happened to her, everything would come to me." The jurors, who had sat stone-faced through much of the testimony, shifted in their seats. It wasn't just circumstantial evidence anymore, it was the echo of intent. Then came the forensic trail, cell tower pings, call logs, and surveillance footage of Dominic in areas that linked directly to the crime scene. But the real dagger came in the form of financial desperation. The husband's bank statements showed overdrafts, looming debts, and a life that no longer fit the luxury image his wife portrayed online. Prosecutors argued that the promise of insurance money, combined with the intoxicating lure of financial control, became the motive no one wanted to believe was possible. The defense fought hard, trying to sever the connection between the mastermind and the trigger man. They painted Dominic as an erratic figure acting on rumors, not instructions. They leaned heavily on the absence of a signed confession from the husband. But the prosecution didn't need a smoking gun. They had a mosaic of greed, deception, and timing that left no room for coincidence. As closing arguments approached, the atmosphere inside the courtroom grew suffocating. Family members clutched tissues, tears streaming silently as attorneys replayed the final moments of Makeva's life with surgical precision. The prosecutor's voice cut through the tension like a blade. She believed in love, she believed in family, and she believed in a future that was stolen from her by the person she trusted most. The jury, stone-faced but visibly shaken, absorbed every word. When the verdict finally came, it was like a thunderclap. Dominic was found guilty of first-degree murder. The husband's verdict followed: conspiracy to commit murder, first-degree murder charges, and life without the possibility of parole. The courtroom erupted, some in sobs of grief, others in sighs of grim relief. Justice, in the cold legal sense, had been served. But in the silence that followed, one truth lingered. Makeva Jenkins had manifested success, but she never could have imagined she was manifesting her own death at the hands of those she loved most. The courtroom verdict was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of an entirely different storm. The echoes of that gavel strike lingered in every corner of the Jenkins household, in every whispered conversation within the community. For those who had followed the case from the very start, it wasn't just about Makeva anymore. It was about the layers of betrayal, the lies so skilled. How did a dream so full of promise unravel into such horror? For Makeva's family, grief wasn't a single emotion. It was a complex maze of anger, disbelief, and a gnawing sense of injustice that no verdict could completely heal. Her mother, once vibrant and full of hope for her daughter's future, now sat in silence for hours on end, staring at photographs of Makeva laughing, unaware of the cruel fate waiting for her. Those pictures became haunting relics, reminders of a life full of ambition and generosity. Each image carried its own story: Makeva hugging her children, cutting ribbons at business events, standing proudly as a symbol of perseverance. All that light extinguished because of one person's greed. In the weeks following the conviction, the community grappled with a truth they didn't want to face: evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it looks familiar. Sometimes it's someone you've welcomed into your home. The betrayal cut deep because people believed they knew the man behind the crime, a husband, a father. They couldn't reconcile the smiling man in family photos with the calculated murderer described in court. The question that kept echoing in neighborhood conversations was chilling: if he could do this to her, what is anyone capable of? Behind prison walls, the convicted killer sat in a silence of his own making. The bravado that once fueled his decisions had vanished. Now, reality pressed down on him like an iron weight. Every clang of a cell door was a reminder that he had traded freedom for a fleeting fantasy, a life without Makeva, a life built on lies. But even behind bars, whispers followed him. Other inmates knew his story. They knew the headlines. Some called him cold-blooded. Others called him a fool. And in the dead of night, when the prison fell quiet, those words lingered in his mind, replaying like a cruel refrain: was it worth it? For Makeva's children, the aftermath was the most devastating of all. How do you explain to a child that the person who once tucked them in at night is the same person who destroyed their entire world? Therapy sessions became routine. Counselors struggled to mend hearts too young to carry such heavy pain. Every milestone they reached, graduations, birthdays, holidays, was shadowed by absence. There was no mother to beam with pride, no father to cheer them on. The very foundation of their lives had been shattered beyond repair. Financial ruin compounded emotional devastation. The very wealth that had fueled the motive became an empty illusion. Lawsuits followed the conviction. Businesses collapsed. The empire Makeva had fought so hard to build crumbled piece by piece, leaving behind nothing but debt and broken trust. For many who had invested in her vision, it was more than a financial loss, it was a personal wound. She had been their inspiration, a testament to resilience. Her death wasn't just the loss of a person, it was the death of a dream shared by so many. And then there were the friends, the people who had cheered her on through every success. They carried the heaviest guilt. They replayed conversations, searching for signs they might have missed. Could we have stopped this? Could we have saved her? The truth offered no comfort. Makeva had trusted deeply, and that trust had cost her life. The media frenzy faded eventually, but the scars never did. Her story became a cautionary tale, dissected in podcasts, true crime documentaries, and online forums. Strangers debated her choices, speculated on her life, and turned her tragedy into content. But for those who loved her, the sensational headlines were salt in an open wound. They didn't see a headline, they saw a daughter, a sister, a mother who deserved so much more than this ending. In the years that followed, vigils were held annually in her honor. Candles lit in the darkness, flickering against the night sky, each flame a quiet promise: you will never be forgotten. Speeches were made, tears shed, prayers whispered. Yet, even in remembrance, the pain felt fresh, like a wound that refused to heal. And perhaps the most haunting part of this story wasn't the act itself, but the why. Why does ambition twist into greed? Why does love decay into betrayal? Why does trust, so pure and unconditional, become the very weapon used to destroy? These are the questions that linger, long after the cameras stop rolling, long after the verdict is read. Questions that echo in the silence of empty rooms and in the hollow ache of hearts that will never be whole again. If this case gripped you as much as it did us, make sure you hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear this story, and subscribe so you never miss another deep dive into the darkest corners of true crime. Turn on notifications, because every case we cover could be the next one you've never heard before. What do you think about the choices made in this case? Could Makeva's death have been prevented, or was betrayal already written in the shadows? Drop your thoughts down in the comments, we read every single one. And remember, it costs nothing to be aware, but awareness could save a life. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and we'll see you in the next one.